Hi everyone. So I'm back from the Astrological Association conference. We had a fantastic time. It was lovely catching up with old friends and making new ones as well. Um, I really enjoyed giving my talk, and I was thrilled that we had a super discussion at the end of it, literally for 15 minutes. You know, we really sort of got deep into the subject. There were a few technical hitches at the beginning of my talk, so I'm not sure how great the video will be in the very first section. So just in case, it's there's it's the quality of it's not great in that first section, I've decided to re-record my talk here at home. So let me just share my screen and here we go. Just bear with me 1 second while I do this. Okay, so here we go. The deep evolutionary force of Pluto and Haumea, where there is hope, there is life. So we're there or thereabouts, aren't we? That Pluto ingress into Aquarius. It's sort of dipped back into Capricorn, and we'll do that once more next year before it finally moves into Aquarius in November 2024. We've been talking about it for ages, haven't we? Pluto into Aquarius, and we've all been imagining a myriad of innovations, things like continued exploration of space, growth of artificial intelligence, virtual reality, gene therapy, cloning, artificial wounds. The list is only limited by the confines of the mind, which is very Aquarian, isn't it? Um, but looking at the bigger picture, when Pluto does actually ingress Aquarius and hit that 00 degrees of Aquarius, what it's doing is triggering the degree of that great mutation that we had back in 2020 when Jupiter and Saturn conjoined at 0 Aquarius, that shift into an air era. And it's the first time that air shift, that move into an air era had occurred since the 1200s. So on the back of the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn in 2020, that was a huge deal, both astrologically and historically. Um, but for any innovation to be born, let's hope this works. Yeah, there we go. For any innovation to be born, a spark of life is needed. A creative energy to fan the flames. So there might there be another dimension to this, another deep evolutionary force working alongside Pluto. So in my ongoing work on dwarf planets, the archetypes have become my new normal in my work. And it was Haumea's prominence in Pluto's ingress into Aquarius that over the past couple of years has led me into the world of genetic engineering, cloning, and other scientific manipulations of DNA, the stuff of life. And of course, Pluto and Haumea are going to be in a fixed square for most of this decade, which is what I'm going to talk about. Um, so I'm going to look at this from the perspective of the healing potentials that we can perhaps see over the next few years, the medical innovations. And hence my image of the phoenix rising from the flames, born anew, rising from the ashes, purified and healed. And this is my attempt at AI art, and I have been sort of having a bit of fun creating lots of images. Don't know how good they are, but I'm certainly enjoying it. But I do think it really captures the theme of the talk today. But first, I want to talk, just quickly show the event chart. I always pull up event charts for everything. I just love them because they just always do tell the story. I'll not spend too long, just pull out a few key points. So here you can see a Mars Haumea conjunction newly ingressed into Scorpio, sort of conjunct the midheaven from the ninth house there. it's very prominent, and I think it does describe the powerful focus of the talk, and hopefully how deep I'm going to go into the subject. We are going to delve deep, I hope. But I think with the ongoing situation in Israel, of course, this is particularly significant. And when I looked at this on my way down to the conference on the train, I was really shocked to see that this is the first time Mars and Haumea had formed a conjunction in Scorpio since 1769. And there was a series of Mars Haumea conjunctions in Scorpio starting from 1745 up to that 1769 date. So what we saw during that period were things like the 7 Years' War, the American Revolution, I'll miss that one out, but you get where I'm coming from. The British Empire sort of spreading out. We had Cook exploring New Zealand. So there was a lot of fighting over power and possessions. And in that case, those cases, it was fighting over possession of land. And, that's what we're seeing in Israel now. So it's incredibly distressing to see, and it is incredibly serious, I believe. But I just felt I had to mention it. But I'm digressing. So let's move on. So we can see there how May is square to Pluto, which of course will exact when Pluto moves to 0 Aquarius. The square was exact at the late degrees of the cardinal signs last June as well. So the square's been in operation for a while, and because of its long orb, for the past few years, and I'll explain that more later. And then we can see the nodal axes there. And as we know, Pluto has been forming a T-square with the nodal axes for much of this year. And, we are at an evolutionary crossroads in many, many ways, personally and collectively. Then we have that Libra stellium up there, capturing the solar eclipse with Mercury and the South Node conjunct. It's Libra, it's air. That's lovely energy for sharing new ideas, for connecting and collaborating. And it's in the 9th house, and the talks were streamed internationally as well as being done in person. Also, which I don't have marked up here, we have a Venus-Saturn opposition, quite clinical, I think, across that 2nd, 8th axes. I think that describes the value system and the ethics associated with the medical topics I'm going to be discussing today. Certainly about some boundaries that may have to be crossed. For example, when we're talking about barriers to fertility, that type of thing. But I'll discuss more on that later. So I want to start with the Pluto discovery chart, and I use this all the time when I'm teaching or speaking, because it just describes so beautifully the evolutionary nature of Pluto. So we have Pluto in Cancer there, and we have the moon in Scorpio. We have a water trine, okay? It's not just any old water trine. They're in mutual reception. They're in each other's signs. And the very nature of Pluto and the moon, of course, is water. It's the source of all life, that primordial soup from which we all emerged from the womb. It's evolutionary. It's about sex and genetics and reproduction, family, ancestry, nurturing the species. And of course, where there's water, there's life. So keep that in mind as we go through this talk as well. And collectively, Pluto is about hidden forces which affect society and our own ancestral evolutionary roots. When its energies are resisted, it can be, violent and destructive, as we know, but when worked with, it can be healing and therapeutic. It's about power, life, death, and regeneration. What rises from the runes to be born anew. And it also heals, what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. And I often sort of liken this to, someone being treated for cancer and with chemotherapy. They're introducing a toxin into their body to kill the cancer, but it can make them incredibly ill as well. But when it's successful, they do rise anew, and hopefully the cancer is cured. You know, and it's alchemically it's similar to, you know, that which is calcinated or blackened in order to be broken down and then purified. So you might be asking what Haumea has to do with this. So you can see Haumea there in Leo, and Haumea and Pluto were building and were about to form a conjunction in the 1950s, which we'll be looking at later. And we also have Mercury in Aquarius opposite Haumea, which of course is about communication and innovation, and you'll see how that fits later too. But first, let's talk a little bit about Haumea. So, Haumea, it's a trans-Neptunian dwarf planet. It's out there in the Kuiper belt. It's got two moons, Namaka and Hayaka, and it's got rings too. Its orbit's around 283 to 309 years, very, very similar to Pluto. And it spends about around 25 years in each sign. But like Pluto, it has an eccentric orbit. It's non-regular. So sometimes it can spend longer in one sign than the other, just depending what stage of its orbit it's at, whether it's apogee or perigee. But the thing that's fascinating, it spins incredibly fast. It takes only 4.5 hours to rotate. So it's like a dynamo, you know, it's, you know, a source of vast, vast creative output. Mythologically, Haumea is Hawaii's most ancient deity. Okay, so we're moving away from those Greek, Roman archetypes and into the Polynesian. Haumea is Hawaii's most ancient deity, mother goddess to the island and the other gods, in particular Pele, the volcano goddess. And there's hardly a more spectacular sight than lava spewing, you know, from a volcano, flowing down the sides of it and then cooling to form new land. It's creative. It's like the earth giving birth, but it's also incredibly destructive. Haumea is the midwife of nature. You know, in the myth, she repeatedly transforms from an old woman to a young woman and gives birth to babies from various parts of the body. So she's always ensuring further generations, the evolution of the species, so to speak. And it, you know, it's quite a Plutonian image, of course, you know, creation versus destruction. And Haumea really is a double-edged sword, you know, that matriarch of destruction and creativity. And if you're sort of already interested in dwarf planets, you may already be familiar with the charts of Japan and the bombings of Nagasaki and Hiroshima. In both bombings, there was a Leo Sun Haumea conjunction with Pluto not far away, sitting right on top of Japan's Saturn. Mars and Uranus in Gemini were right on top of Japan's Haumea, which I think describes the twin explosions, but also that they were dropped and detonated from the air. You know, so astrology just does paint incredibly powerful pictures, and here's one, a fiery death and devastation, born from what was just a spark of man-made creativity. So I think, you know, Haumea does walk that fine line, that balancing act between creativity and destruction, and very much sums up that, you know, when something's man-made and has potential to destroy as many as it can help, you know, there's ethical and emotive themes that must be brought into it. And if you think Haumea was discovered just after the 2004 Boxing Day Indonesian tsunami, which killed nearly 300,000 people. So we often see Haumea present in charts of environmental activists and also climatic events. But as matriarch of destruction, she's also one of creativity. And this is just such a beautiful example of that creativity. This is the chart of Louise Brown, the first ever test tube baby from the 1970s, for those of you who can remember. And we can see Haumea there sat in the 6th house in a clinical stellium, Virgo stellium with Venus and Mars in the North Node. A sex in a test tube, isn't it? There's no other way to describe it. Sex in a test tube. We also have an incredibly strong creative fifth house there. We've got Sun in domicile. And we've also, got Mercury and Saturn there in Leo as well. Um, and Louise Brown's mother couldn't conceive naturally because she had blocked fallopian tubes. That's in the public domain. So I think we've got that classic Saturn blockage symbolism there as well in Leo, that blockage to natural creativity. So hopefully that's given you a little bit of insight into Haumea. But before we move on to the cycle itself, because we're going to be talking about medical and health themes today, let's look a little bit at the medical astrology would associate with what I'm going to talk about. So the square is going to be mostly in Aquarius and Scorpio this decade. So let's look at those particularly. So Aquarius we associate with blood circulation, legs, calves, ankles, the intellect and mind, nerves and neurons. Okay. And Aquarius sees ahead. And in Wanda Seller's amazing book, Introduction to Medical Astrology, she says that because Aquarius visualizes, and it's to do with the mind is key in the healing process. Scorpio, infectious and contagious diseases, toxic conditions, of course, fertility, reproduction, regeneration, elimination, the stuff of life, which we're going to talk about today. And Pluto, very similar, genetics, chromosomes, genes, mutation, all those sorts of topics. Haumea being a dwarf planet, hasn't been classified medically as such, but I would certainly link it to fertility and creativity. Okay. So let's have a look at the Pluto Haumea cycle itself. So we'll start with the conjunctions that happened in the 1950s. This is the first of three exact conjunctions that we had. And it's important to bear in mind that because we've got two very slow moving planets here with elliptical orbits, their cycle is completely irregular. They seem to spend a lot of time chasing each other around, then one will go retrograde, then the other will go retrograde. So they seem to come within like hand's reach before pulling away again. So this conjunction was more or less in orb, or a maximum of 3-degree orb throughout the 1950s. And of course, if we're talking about the outer planet cycles, we just have to sort of look at Richard Tarnas and his recommendation of 10-degree orbs or even more being completely and utterly valid. Okay. So as we know, Haumea and Pluto have similar evolutionary energies. Haumea regularly rebirths while Pluto regenerates. Both are about life and death. So if we understand their cycle and their relationship, it's going to give us a much deeper insight into Pluto's journey through Aquarius. So, of course, what happened in 1953, Francis Crick and James Watson published a structure for deoxyribose nucleic acid. It was their discovery of the double helix structure of DNA. Okay, so Pluto's long been associated with the splitting of the atom, which coincided with its 1930 discovery. Therefore, perhaps it's not unrealistic to associate Haumea with the splitting of the nucleus or DNA. So you can see the conjunction here. It's in fiery Leo, and it's widely square by sign that Scorpio stellium, but more so Venus and widely Moon there. Incredibly fertile and reproductive in Scorpio there. And Venus trines a brand new Jupiter-Uranus cycle there in Cancer. Okay. So we've got another water trine, and that echoes the water theme, that primordial soup, that source of life that I was showing you with that Pluto discovery chart. And regarding that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction, keep in mind what we're going to have in April 2024. We're going to have the start of another new Jupiter-Uranus cycle starting in Taurus, and I'll mention that more later. I could not mention that unaspected sun in Libra, in air. So, because of course it rules that Haumea Pluto conjunction in Leo. So you might be wondering where air fits into all of this. Leo fire, that's clear enough. It's creative action, energy, life, that type of thing. Air, okay? Think about this. DNA is a code and a language. It's the mother tongue of life itself, of creation. And I think perhaps the duality of the double helix is demonstrated by that Libra, the scales, the two sides to Libra there. There's also T-square with Libra and Neptune as the apex. I haven't got it marked up here. And it forms, and it picks up the opposition from that Jupiter-Uranus to the Mars Chiron across that Cancer-Capricorn axis. And I do wonder if that's about breaking down the boundaries of an understanding of ancestry. That Cancer Capricorn axis, it's that familial ancestor axis, the parental axis. But with Chiron there, perhaps it's about using the healing power of medicine, understanding DNA to eventually help heal, wounds and illness, literally. And if any of you have seen the film Evolution with David Duchovny and Julianne Moore, it's a few years old now, but basically an asteroid lands on Earth, sort of forms a crater or cave under the Earth, and within 24 hours, it's formed its own ecosystem. You've got sort of little amoeba-type creatures suddenly growing into sort of mini dinosaurs, and there's mushrooms and everything growing up, and it continues to sort of grow and expand at just a vast, vast rate. And that's what Haumea, I think, is like, with that dynamo effect, that vast, vast creative output. So let's have a look at the timeline of the cycle. I'll not spend too long on this page because you can either sort of screenshot it or have a look at the recording. So please don't worry about taking it all in. But I've started sort of kind of from around 0 AD. All right. So we've got the 2nd, 3rd, 5th centuries there, and we had a series of squares. So what we had, the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, rise of Christianity, that type of thing. Then we move through into the sort of very early medieval period with a series of oppositions. Then we move into the early Middle Ages with squares. Then we move through the Middle Ages into a series of conjunctions, through the Renaissance, through into the Industrial Revolution, that type of thing. And then we land into the 1950s when we had that conjunction, the discovery of the double helix. And here we are today with a series of squares, which began last year in the late degrees of cardinal signs. And then they're going to be in the fixed signs, Aquarius and Scorpio, for really the rest of the decade. And then we get through to the end of the millennia, but we'll not worry too much about that at the moment, I don't think. So I don't want to bore you with too much historical data, but history always tells us a lot. So let's have a quick look at the conjunctions and squares and see what they can tell us, okay? So of course that conjunction in the 1950s, the double helix. Then we go to the 1800s, and this is pretty much the beginning of modern genetics, okay? We had a rediscovery of Mendel's work, which I'll explain in just a second. We also had the discovery of nuclein in 1869, and you might be looking at that and thinking, well, that's 10 years before, this conjunction started in 1878. But remember, the orbs, these planets are so slow moving, they stay in orb for many, many years. So, 10 years preceding the exactment of that conjunction is certainly within the scope of what we're discussing today. Then, of course, we have Mendel, who developed the Mendelian model. So he used pea plants to track, family and inheritance pattern, that the patterns of sort of certain traits. Basically, it was the discovery of genetic inheritance. And of course, we had the likes of many naturalists and botanists, including Darwin. You know, and you know that conjunctions in Taurus and naturalists and botanists fits perfectly with that, and the fact that a lot of this work was done on plants. Then we moved to the 1700s. The conjunction was in Libra. Again, many naturalists and botanists. We had Linnaeus, who was the father of modern taxonomy, the likes of Nauden, who influenced Darwin and Mendel. His work was seen as a precursor to modern genetics. Gardner influenced Mendel. And then we've got the Murder Act. You might be wondering why I've put that there. But we saw a huge leap forward in medical understanding and anatomical advances because it was permitted for doctors to legally carry out experiments on the bodies of executed criminals. Previously, they'd had to go around graveyards in the middle of the night digging up corpses or paying people to dig up corpses. You know, that's what we had, grave robbers, and they were carrying out experiments illegally. But you know, it was made legal, so it was a huge, huge leap forward. You know, and this image of graves being dug up in the middle of the night and corpses being experimented on was said to be the inspiration for Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, which was published in 1818, I think, from memory. And of course, Frankenstein was, you know, stitched together from body parts of dug up corpses and then reanimated using electricity. So Aquarius and so resonant of what was going to be speaking about in the next part of the talk. Then we get back to the 1500s. We had more anatomical advances and understanding of the circulatory system. And then we can even go back as far as 421 BC. We had a conjunction in Aquarius, okay? And Hippocrates suggested then that all organs of parents give off invisible seeds. So already he was developing a hereditary model, you know, similar to sort of Darwin's pangenesis theories too. So if we just move on to the conjunction, computer is stuck. There we go. Sorry, onto the square. I don't want to spend too much time here, but I'm going to highlight a very, very important point. So we can see the next set of squares, apart from what we're having this decade, will be at the end of the millennia. I'm not going to worry about that in the talk today. None of us will be here, very likely, but who knows? Who knows how long our lifespans might have expanded by then. We just don't know. Here we are today with the squares in this decade, okay? And if I say things like stem cells and gene targeting and embryo models, you'll see where I'm going with this. You know, and just recently in the news, there was the story about a little girl who had a kidney transplant, and she doesn't need to take immunosuppressant drugs for the rest of her life because her immune system has been reprogrammed using stem cells from her mother. You know, previously, all transplant patients have had to take drugs for the rest of their lives to prevent the organ rejection. You know, which, you know, would severely impact certain areas of the life. So that's a massive breakthrough, without a doubt. Roe versus Wade, of course, you know, that was from the US last year, that, you know, when the constitutional right to abortion was overturned. That was in June 2022, and that coincided with a Pluto Haumea square in the late degrees of Capricorn and Libra. I'll talk more about that later. And then this is the point that I really want to emphasize. We get to the 1200s. I'm not sure what went on medically there, but what we did see was another grand air mutation which occurred in Aquarius. Exactly the same as that new air era that we saw in 2020, which began in Aquarius. Okay. What we saw then was a massive leap forward in the way we understand things and communicate. Our understanding of language and learning was evolving, you know, questioning and reasoning, scholasticism, you know, with the likes of Thomas Aquinas. So I think this very much ties in with the shift into air that we had in 2020, because DNA is a language. And what we're going to be seeing, I think, is with Pluto and Aquarius and the development of AI, we're going to be using AI to help us in our understanding of DNA. Okay. And then we go back to the 400s, the 200s, and beyond that. I'm still researching these, but time's limited today. So I do want to move on. And hopefully I can just hope you can see that this is a cycle to be viewed through a long range lens. So let's get on to the exciting stuff. Okay. So I just wanted to quickly reiterate how important this Pluto Haumea square is in the Pluto Aquarius ingress. So these are the ingress charts. Okay, I'm not going to go into the charts themselves today. We just don't have time, and they're for a whole other discussion. We could spend hours discussing these. So that was the first ingress earlier this year in March. You can see an exact square there at 0 degrees of the fixed signs there. This is the next Pluto ingress in January next year. You can still see a very, very tight square there. And that will be the third and final Pluto ingress into Aquarius in November next year, when it will bed in through to 2044. Again, incredibly tight. What I don't have marked up here, but you should be able to see, is that Haumea is also forming a water trine to Saturn and Pisces in all of these charts. As I keep saying, where there's water, there's life. And with Saturn and Pisces, I always think what can be imagined can be made real. Okay, so let's move on. And this is mind-blowing, I think. Okay, think about all these AI advancements we know are coming. You know, some we can probably imagine, a lot we probably can't even begin to imagine yet. But this is an absolutely brilliant example. Okay. So this is AlphaFold DeepMind, the protein folding problem. And it's the umbrella company is Google DeepMind, okay? And Google DeepMind is it's a British American AI research lab, and it's a team of scientists, engineers, and ethicists committed to solving intelligence to advance science and benefit humanity. How incredibly Aquarian is that statement? It just screams Aquarius, doesn't it? And this is just proper research into AI. Everything on this this slide is taken from their website, so go and check out DeepMind's website for yourself. Okay. And one thing I find strange, although it's really interesting, it's kind of really plain and played down. So I don't know what that's about. I don't know if that's just me overthinking things. Who knows? Make your own mind up. But what is AlphaFold? Okay, it's a division of Google DeepMind, and it started working on the protein folding challenge back in 2016. And basically, it's just an AI system unfolding proteins and predicting their structure based on their DNA. And as we know, DNA contains the instructions to make proteins, i.e., the DNA is the genetic message converted into amino acids and then proteins. So this is a statement off their website. Inside every cell in your body, billions of tiny molecular machines are hard at work. They're what allow your eyes to detect light, your neurons to fire, and the instructions in your DNA to be read. These machines are proteins. They underpin every biological process and every living thing. They're the building blocks of life. Finding ways to predict the structure of millions of unknown proteins can not only help us tackle disease and more quickly find new medicines, but perhaps also unlock the mysteries of how life itself works. Okay, so for decades, scientists have been working on this and trying to find a method to determine a protein structure. Okay, the protein folding problem. Another quote: the AI was taught by showing it the sequences and structures of around 100,000 known proteins. Experimental techniques for determining structures have been painstakingly laborious and time-consuming, sometimes taking years and millions of dollars. Our latest system can now predict the shape of a protein at scale and in minutes down to atomic accuracy. This is a significant breakthrough and highlights the impact AI can have on science. Wow. I love that the AI was taught. It takes us back to all that scholasticism and understanding of language, etc., etc. The air era, doesn't it? But this is about accelerating scientific discovery, um, especially when we consider the range of illnesses that this could potentially eradicate and cure. Um, oh, so essentially, medical advances are going to be inextricably tied to AI. And look where we're at now. We had the conjunction in the 1950s where men discovered the double helix of DNA. Now we're at the square in the 2020s, and we're passing the job on to AI. AI is going to be helping us understand the double helix DNA more. But play with the the name of this, deep mind, deep Scorpio, mind, Aquarius. I just love it when astrology is as literal as that. So I bet you're dying to see the deep mind chart. Okay, let's have a look. It's fascinating. So here we are. This is a very strong chart in that the time of birth is very, very sound. I got it from Companies House in the UK for when Google DeepMind was set up. And for like many businesses, I just set it for just after midnight. So a very, very sound chart in my opinion. So we have Haumea down in the fourth house in Libra. It's echoing that mother tongue ancestral theme, that type of thing. And it's in a T square again with the ancestral, parental, Capricorn, Cancer axes, which falls across the ascendant, descendant. We also have an unaspected Mercury Chiron conjunction Aquarius in the ninth house. I don't have it marked up here because I didn't want to spend much time on it. But just very quickly, perhaps it's something like the belief in healing the collective via technology, via AI, that type of thing. So yeah, that's interesting. Perhaps not blowing your mind away. I wasn't blown away at first, but when I looked more closely, just look at that ultra sexual, ultra reproductive Venus Mars conjunction in Scorpio in the fifth house. That is going to be triggered by the Pluto Haumea square for the rest of this decade. Okay. Haumea will conjunct Mars 2027, 2028. And then Pluto will square Mars 2026, 2027. But the orbs will be there for much longer than that. And there's the dates for Venus as well, 2029 through to 3032. You're probably wondering why I haven't mentioned that Pisces stellium in the 10th house yet up there. Yet again, we see another new Jupiter-Uranus cycle beginning in Pisces, conjunct the moon. Okay. It's an incredibly strong stellium. We've got an elevated Jupiter, rules the midheaven, and it's, in rulership in Pisces. But whenever I think about Pisces, it's incredibly balsamic. It's very 12th house. It's like the womb, there's something gestating, and it's on the threshold. There's something waiting to be born here. There's new discoveries, that can sort of bring freedom from suffering for people, perhaps if we're looking from a medical perspective. And again, it's water, it's that primordial soup, and this is about evolutionary advances to come. And of course, we have transit Neptune on that stellium right now. The potential is vast and unimaginable. The limits are limitless, literally. And then Saturn's going to come along and conjoin that stellium in 2025, 2026. And again, Saturn and Pisces, what can be imagined can be made real. So this is all quite profound, I feel. I could study this chart for a long time. And again, I think it shows that Pluto Haumea cycle, this square in particular, it's a deeper backdrop for the other planetary cycles, such as the Jupiter-Uranus cycles, and they're simply acting as catalysts for that deeper evolutionary energy. But in reality, what type of conditions and illnesses are we looking at? You know, how's this going to make a difference to us in real life? Okay. So let's look at some different areas of interest. So neuroscience, okay. You know, we've been hearing in the news, there's lots of new Alzheimer's drugs being developed, and one of the latest is donanemab. I'm not sure if I pronounced that right. And that's being developed by pharmaceutical company Eli Lilly, okay? You know, when we think about neuroscience, we're thinking about Aquarius, we're thinking about the brain, the nerves and neurons, and the transfer of information via the electrical impulses. And of course, Alzheimer's is linked to, you know, proteins affecting the brain cells. So just think back to deep fold and, you know, that deep mind and that protein folding challenge. So Eli Lilly is a leading US pharmaceutical company founded by Colonel Eli Lilly back in the 1800s, when we had those Pluto Haumea conjunctions in Taurus. So we're going back to all those naturalists and botanists and the development of modern genetics. Okay. And what a fantastic stellium we have at the bottom there. Sun, Haumea, Pluto, all in Taurus there. Square, creative Uranus in Leo there. But that Taurus stellium, it captures everything I've been describing, you know, regarding evolutionary creative output, fertile ground, you know, resources for the future. And it's on the IC, you know, it's so evolutionary. And I do wonder if this might encompass the more understanding around psychedelics, mushrooms. You know, I know they're sort of being explored more in medical areas, and perhaps we're going to be using AI to help us understand their effects and how they work more. And of course, guess what's going this conjunction? The stellium's going to be triggered by in 2024. Of course, that Jupiter Uranus cycle starting at 21 Taurus in April. Okay. And you might want to buy some shares in this company. I'm not a financial astrologer. You might want to ask someone like Christine Skinner, but even I can see that might be worth a punt without a doubt. So I just think that the output from this company regarding neuroscience and of course other pharmaceuticals could be absolutely massive. Okay. Perhaps also some ethical questions that will arise from new innovations, and I will be discussing them later. But I think when that Jupiter-Uranus conjunction hits that, it's going to be like a catalyst on speed. And just keep in mind Haumea being that creative dynamo. Pluto's going to oppose Uranus in 2033 to 34, and Haumea will square it a few years later, forming a T-square in effect. Also, this company is undergoing a Saturn return. You know, Saturn's approaching zero Pisces at the minute. You know, it's going to station in November, but it will make a third and final pass of that Saturn, you know, in the next few months. And then it will move on to conjoin that North Node in Pisces. And that will be at the same time as Deep Mind's Pisces stellium will also be triggered by Saturn. So, you know, you wonder if these pharma companies and the AI labs like DeepMind are going to be working hand in hand. I very much think that that's likely. We also have transit Pluto on this ascendant at the moment, depending on how accurate that time of birth is. Okay. So there's a huge amount going on here. And this is just one company of many. There's lots of pharma companies out there. You know, so you can only imagine the innovation, but the speed of the innovation that we're going to be see coming over the next few years. And that's before I even start mentioning the, you know, the Saturn Neptune conjunction at 0 Aries in 2026. And of course, we associate Neptune with pharmaceutical companies. And then Uranus is going to go into Gemini in 2025, 2026. So again, I think it's the sheer speed of the innovations that's going to be mind blowing. So another area of interest is reproduction. Okay. And as we've been discussing genetics and evolution, this brings us back to Haumea, who produced babies from various parts of her body and also brought the promise of pain-free natural childbirth. And no one would argue against the most pain-free birth being that of not bearing a baby in the first place. And I've no doubt there's been countless women through the ages in the throes of labour wishing they could instead just have their baby passed to them already fully gestated from a pod. Artificial wombs are already in development. You know, they are limited by legal and ethical constraints around the full-term development of the fetuses, but they are being innovated. Just think of the potential they offer, you know, just to say premature babies or providing an alternative for those who can't carry a baby naturally, or those who want to have a family but just don't want to, you know, have a pregnancy or carry a baby, which is absolutely fair enough. And I think it does sort of resonate with the idea of the alchemical alembic, you know, the vessel within which the alchemical process occurs. And of course, you know, pregnancy, gestating a child is the ultimate alchemical process, if you like. So this recent BBC article caught my attention. You know, scientists grow a whole model of a human embryo without sperm or egg. I think it was from stem cells, and it did actually produce the hormones to give a positive pregnancy test. In the news recently as well, in the UK, the first successful womb transplant was carried out. You know, these have been carried out for years now, I think in Saudi Arabia back in 2000, in Sweden in 2018. But are we now at the point where we're going to be, you know, begin harvesting, you know, wombs in the lab ready for transplant? And then we go back to Roe versus Wade, which I mentioned. You know, the constitutional right to abortion was overturned. You know, a key point in the control women have over their bodies and their reproductive health, and the evolution of their families. Incredibly, you know, abortion is a very plutonic subject, and then you bring Haumea into the mix, you know, who we connect with giving birth and fertility. So it's a very relevant subject, and it'll be interesting to see how that develops in line with the Pluto Haumea squares. This is another part of the article. I couldn't fit the whole thing on, obviously. And this is the mixer in which the cells are sort of grown and developed. Okay. But think of where we are at currently. You know, gender selection and elective births are already becoming commonplace. We're already tampering with evolution, you know, so to speak. But we've been talking about this for many years. You know, we go back to the 1970s. Shulamith Firestone, a feminist and author, she wrote a book, The Dialectic of Sex, where she argues that the biological family has always oppressed women and children, and means of artificial childbirth would free women from traditional childbearing female roles. The freeing of women from the tyranny of reproduction by every means possible, and the diffusion of the childbearing role to society as a whole, men as well as women. Okay. Molecular geneticist, that's a mouthful, Arithi Prasad, much more recently, she wrote an article, you know, describing how artificial wombs will change our ideas of gender, family, and equality. We go back to the 1930s, the novel Brave New World by Aldous Huxley. You know, it's a fictional description of a genetically engineered society produced in artificial wombs. Everyone's born in a pod, where the concept of mother and father is scoffed at, and everyone belongs to everyone else. And I think these examples very much capture the Aquarian evolution of societal organization. You know, so, you know, are we sort of debating natural versus mechanical sexual reproduction, the female emancipation from both the pain of childbirth and imbalance of gender roles in society. But if you look at that mixer in the middle there, does it perhaps remind you of anything? This perhaps the divine feminine, so to speak. And with all these, with the promise of artificial wombs and mechanical reproduction, perhaps, are we looking at a detachment from the divine feminine and the end of women as the holy chalice, the end of physical procreation even? Or is it just, an indication that we're going to remove any barriers that prevent natural childbirth in the first place? So let's think about genetic engineering, okay? Gene targeting, gene editing, stem cells, we're all familiar with those terms, and we're living in an era of genetic engineering already. And genetic engineering is simply manipulating genes using technology. So if we look at a few key areas, we can start with gene therapy, which is the therapeutic treatment involving transferring genetic material into the body to modify or replace defective genetic material. It's very emotive, isn't it? Just imagine the whole range of illnesses it might potentially treat, cancer and genetic inherited diseases, things like motor neuron, Alzheimer's, dementia. But it's emotive also because of the controversial source of the material. For example, stem cells and embryonic cells or cells derived from other species. We also have therapeutic cloning, which creates replacement tissues. Mini organs or organoids are already being successfully cultivated in the lab. In 2019, the first bioprinted 3D heart was created. Just last year, a man in the US underwent a pig heart transplant. The heart had undergone gene editing to help reduce rejection. Unfortunately, it wasn't successful, long term, but you can see we're on the path to getting there. So we have to ask ourselves, is it better to grow these organs from human cells for transplanted to humans rather than using other species? Or should we use every viable resource regardless of where it comes from? And I think that's possibly a very Uranus and Taurus question. We also have reproductive cloning, and that's producing whole copies of organisms. That very much echoes the myth of Haumea, doesn't it? Almost like Eve being created from Adam's rib. It's already commonplace. We can already clone our pets. If your pet dog dies, you can get a clone of it. It's happening with sports horses, agriculture animals, endangered species, okay? But human cloning is always going to be a contentious issue. The closest we've come so far is with the cloning of primates back in 1999, and then in 2019. We've had the first genome edited babies born in 2018. This was by a Chinese scientist, and his work was condemned as unethical and flawed by the scientific community and the World Health Organization. But I think, when Pluto enters Aquarius, with Uranus still in Taurus, will there be a challenge to our societal ethics and value systems regarding genetic engineering and therefore human cloning, especially if it offers potential of eradicating, these diseases and conditions. But of course, the shadow side, is the artificial breeding of superior individuals. The potential to filter the best stock, to build the best bodies and minds, the reinvention and the upgrade of the human. And then we're starting to talk about transhumanism and eugenics, aren't we? Compromising human rights of equality. And it's programmed evolution. We've got to ask what happens to the population of our lifespans continue to expand because we're eradicating so many illnesses and conditions. And I haven't even mentioned the blending of man with machine yet. You know, we've got brain-computer interface being implanted in humans to aid with the likes of paralysis. Helping people who have lost the use of their legs to walk again. And we're back to that Aquarius theme. You know, Aquarius rules all those nerves and neurons and electrical impulses in the body, but it also rules legs. And we're connecting the two again. And Elon Musk is the latest to jump on board that with his Neuralink startup. And then I do wonder if then that's just one step away from the conscious mind being able to survive outside the physical body. You know, I wouldn't be surprised if that does come at some point in the future. So the images here are from the dystopian film Elysium. You know, Earth's become a battleground, and the elite live in space stations orbiting the Earth. And have these machines to reatomize people to cure sort of any form of disease. And if we take the meaning of Elysium or Elysian fields, it describes a paradise world. In Greek mythology, it's the afterlife. Life is perfect. There's no pain. It's like the Blessed Isles that the elves go to in Lord of the Rings, that type of thing. It's utopia versus dystopia. So we have to question as well, might our manipulations of DNA, which is essentially made from atoms like everything else, go this far? We're coming full back to Pluto, aren't we? When Pluto was discovered, and it was associated with the splitting of the atom, and now we're associating Haumea with the splitting of DNA. And there's such a wealth of innovation to come here, and I've certainly probably raised a lot more questions than I've given answers to, but hopefully you can see how very pregnant the future of medical innovation is when combined with AI, you know, for our health personally and collectively, albeit with quite a few caveats along the way. So that's pretty much it. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed it. Okay, there's just the list of references. And if you have any questions, please feel free to get in touch. I can be contacted by any of these means. Okay, thank you very much and take care.